So when you're eating something like that, you just don't wolf it down. You really got to think about how amazing the animal is. And sort of once you have a sort of a respect for the animal, then you want to protect it.
This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. I'm John Susman. If fish were like cars, tuna would be the Ferraris of the ocean. Sleek, powerful and made for speed. Their torpedo-shaped bodies streamline their movement through the water, and their special swimming muscles enable them to cruise the ocean highways with great efficiency. Tuna are remarkable and impressive wild animals. The northern bluefin can reach 5 metres in length and weigh as much as a tonne, more than a horse. Their specialised body shape, fins and scales enable some species of tuna to swim as fast as 70 kilometres per hour. Over 20 metres, they will leave a Ferrari in their wake. Tuna swim incredible distances as they migrate. Some tuna are born in Indonesia, travel across the entire Pacific to feed off the coast of South America, and then swim all the way back to Indonesia to breed. These extraordinary marine animals are also integral to the diet of millions of people and are both the most commercially valuable and highly traded fish on the planet. Commercial tuna fisheries represent a significant part of the blue economy, with the 7 species yellowfin, skipjack, big eye, albacore and Atlantic, Pacific and southern bluefin the most valuable fishes on the planet. In 2020, commercial fishing vessels landed about 5.2 million metric tonnes of the 7 species, with an estimated wharf value of over $12 billion. Many of the social, financial and environmental problems we are facing as a global society can be traced back to the complex and sometimes corrupt systems that have evolved to bring us our food. The tuna industry, as the largest traded seafood commodity on the planet, is especially subject to difficulty in tracing the supply and managing quality. One of the world's leading tuna authorities is Australia's Dr. Alistair Douglas. Dr. Tuna, as I like to call him, is as passionate about the conservation of this amazing animal as he is about eating it. He uses his unique knowledge of tuna from water to plate to build catching, data collection and trading systems which offer a next generation to the sustainable trade of tuna.
I'm Alistair Douglas. I'm the founder and partner of Eachmile Technologies, which is a Singapore-based company with a team that's global, but I'm making the move back to Australia in July. I was actually born in UK, in Bournemouth. That was in the British Army, so I grew up landlocked in Germany during the Cold War. I didn't really see the ocean at all. We emigrated to Australia when I was just going on 8 years old and saw the ocean really for the first time and fell in love with it. And also fell in love with fishing and whatnot. And went on to study marine science, marine biology at James Cook University. And I majored in fisheries and aquaculture and also did studies in Japanese. I really sort of fell in love with tuna at that time. I found them pretty fascinating from, a physiological perspective, biology. And then I found them fascinating from a socioeconomic perspective as well, in the fisheries and how interesting and how important it was to protect them, but also to make sure that we're maximising our return on investment that we have in the industry, and it's particularly the southern bluefin tuna industry. And I went on to do postgraduate research in Port Lincoln with the farming industry that's down there. And that took me to Japan to continue my research at Tokyo University of Fisheries in collaboration with Flinders University. And then after that, I ended up setting up a company to import tuna into Japan and sell it on auction floors around the country and direct sell it. And then set up similar operations in the United Kingdom and in Singapore.
For many, an introduction to tuna that is not canned comes in the form of an ubiquitous piece of tuna sushi. Whether taken from a revolving sushi train in a suburban shopping centre or being presented in a high-end temple of gastronomy by a sushi sun, the influence on tuna consumption by this staple of Japanese food is significant. Tuna consumptions in all markets outside of Japan has tripled in the past 15 years. I'd argue that this is a direct reflection of how sushi and sashimi have infiltrated popular Western culinary culture. In Japan, tuna holds an almost religious appeal. It is as respected as it is sought after.
Yeah, I mean, they have records of consuming tuna in middens, I think, from the 8th century. Sushi was a street food originally, and tuna wasn't really highly regarded back in the day because it requires some expertise and some cold chain, and so it wasn't really a highly regarded fish. In fact, a lot of people don't realise that skipjack tuna, the stuff that we stick in tins, was the most valuable tuna species back in the day because it goes off quickly, and getting it into Kyoto, the sort of internal capital at the time, required a lot of expense, if you like, and only the feudal lords and the well-to-do people, the well-heeled people, if you like, or the well-getted, if you use Japanese sandals as an example, could afford it. And then bluefin tuna, I met some old boys at Tsukiji fish markets in Tokyo there, and the sushi restaurants around the markets that back in the day, remember throwing away the belly, the belly flap that we now sell for about $300 a kilogram. They used to feed it to the cats. It was considered just too oily. And then after the war, the introduction of fast food, they sort of blamed the infatuation with the belly, the high fat part of the tuna on the West for introducing all this sort of fatty food. And that's when it sort of took off in value, and the bluefins tuna species were being much highly sought after around the time that I was born in the early 1970s.
Arguably the most revered marketplace for seafood in the world, Tokyo's famous fish market, Tsukiji, is indeed as mysterious as it is overwhelming. A law unto itself, it is a place that defies interpretation. Although moved to a new location in Toyosu, in the outer suburbs of Tokyo, it remains the most important single place for seafood in the world. Over 3 million kilograms with a worth of over $30 million of seafood is traded daily, with nearly 50% of that value sold in tuna alone. It's claimed that the Tokyo fish market is the engine that drives the global tuna industry. When
I first went to Tsukiji, I think there were over 2,000 intermediary wholesalers, and now there's around about 600 in Toyosu, which is the new market where Tsukiji had to move to. But essentially, you have importers that obviously bring the fish in. It's interesting because from a tax perspective, because we don't know what the value is pre-auction, so you have to have a deposit with the government, if you like, through the transportation companies to make sure you can pay your tax when the price is settled. But essentially, you grade the tuna, and there's technicians at Narita Airport that go to meet the tuna to do so, and then decide where they're going to send what quality of fish based on supply to those auction markets around the country. Tsukiji is obviously, or was, the premier market, so the best quality fish would go there. And they go to what's called Yuga Geisha, which are the auctioneers. I was working very closely with the very first one set up by the government called Koichi, and regulated by the government. It's a 5% commission that they receive when they auction the fish off. Now, the best fish are lined up first all the way through, and the top species. So it'll be from northern bluefin, then southern bluefin, and then you'll have big eye, and then you'll have yellowfin tuna. And the high quality ones are further up that start off the auction. And the wholesalers who have a license, then they come in anywhere from about 4 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning to grade the fish, both the frozen and the chilled. And, based on the orders that they've got, the supply that's available there, they'll sort of figure out what's a good price to pay for it and bid for it on the auction accordingly. They then have it and they cut it up in their little stores. They have it until 10 a.m. to make a claim on it, just in case there's a quality issue. But then it's distributed out to the sushi restaurants and the retailers from there.
Like any premium food or wine, fresh tuna is priced based on how it is graded. This is especially true for the mighty bluefin tuna headed to the sushi kitchens of the world, where appearance and taste are scrutinised by every bite. Grading tuna is at once a science, an art and a talent. The sheer number of variables and possible outcomes are pretty much endless. Add to this the subjectivity of buyers' personal preferences for certain culinary applications, and things get even trickier. Ultimately, when it comes to grading fresh tuna for the sashimi market, it takes an intuition and a talent built on countless thousands of experiences to deliver accuracy and consistency. It also takes a degree of Zen awareness.
Yeah, so the tuna set up, there'll be a core taken out of the fish, because the tuna have what's called a reap marab, where they have a counter-current system or arrangement of the vascular system where they're trapping heat into their body, and it gives them efficiencies for swimming. They're super fast, and the heat helps with that. Like, we warm up our muscles before we sprint or run. But the double-edged sword there is that they can overheat and they can cook themselves and they build up the lactic acid and the pH drops, and that denatures the proteins in the flesh and causes what's known as tuna burn. And so they have to core the fish, take a sample out like a cheese corer, and they put that on top of the fish for the buyers to examine. Other buyers will come in on the tail. They will take a look at the tail. Sometimes they will take a small sample to rub in their hands, especially with the frozen tuna. You'll see the guys with a hook, and they'll be whacking the fish in the side, and how much that hook goes in tells them how much fat's on the tuna. The softer the flesh, the more the hook goes in, and they sort of can detect that down to micromillimeters, just like the wool graders. And then they'll take a chunk of flesh, they'll heat it up in their hand, they'll use the torch, and they'll look for the tuna bloom. That's where the pigment responsible for the red colour, myoglobin, similar to us, becomes oxymyoglobin, and it becomes that bright cherry red colour. And so they look at that and they feel for the oil, and they get a feeling for the quality and the shelf life that fish will yield once they cut it up and send it to the sushi restaurant. And so they'll bid accordingly based on that grading system. So it looks like a mystery. It certainly is a little bit. They use all these different codes as well as grades. And that was part of my research in Port Lincoln back in 1999.
The Skidgee fish market is both the zenith and a fortress of seafood knowledge. Almost impenetrable to outsiders, those that have spent time within the hallowed walls inevitably have a library of intriguing and amazing stories.
One of the things that struck me early on in the piece was that the old boys would, a couple of them would say that Skidgee fish market isn't the biggest fish market in Japan, that Narita Airport is the biggest fish market. And when you go out to the airport, you see all these tuna coffins, they call them, the boxes that carry the tuna, laid out for the grading. It's pretty impressive. And that really impressed upon me the importance of logistics. And how we can, use platforms to disrupt the supply chain somewhat for the better. I used to get up at 1 a.m. At Tokyo University of Fisheries and ride the CRC bicycle, my research bicycle, into the fish markets and take all these measurements and whatnot from the fish. We were looking at ways to more digitally grade the quality because we, as a tuna farming industry, we wanted to know what impact the towing the husbandry, the feeds, the harvest strategies had on the quality of the product, because that was a huge cost to us. And we wanted to look at what was, negatively, positively, or neutrally impacting the quality of the product. So we needed a way to measure it, because it was all just lines and squiggles by the Japanese graders that we didn't understand. And so I was using digital cameras and those sorts of things to take photographs and measurements and various different tools. And the wholesalers used to laugh at me like I was crazy. Thankfully, it wasn't so crazy. I got their grades for quality pre-auction, and then I showed them the correlation between the grades and this RGB ratio. So it was the red, green, and blue, and it was the red colour over the green plus the blue value. And it was perfectly correlated to their quality grades and the price grades. And the looks on their faces when I showed them this data. Of course, they're the gold standard that we need to calibrate this equipment to, so they'll never go away. But yeah, that was a pretty funny moment.
The bluefin tuna is a truly remarkable animal. They are the largest tunas and can live up to 50 years. They migrate across all oceans and can dive deeper than 1,000 metres.
A lot of people don't realise that a northern bluefin tuna gets to up to 4 metres in length and 700 kilograms. Most people think of tuna, they think of the smaller fish that goes into the tins. They don't realise that these are animals that live for 40 years. That to just maintain basic metabolism, they've got to move at 4 metres per second if they're 4 metres in length, which is very fast. Each one of them is unique, that they spend their lives sort of traversing the oceans and circumnavigating the globe, thousands of kilometres in a year, backwards and forwards between the west coast of the United States and the Sea of Japan. And you think about what that animal through those years has seen and what it's eaten. It's unique. And every slice of it, because it varies longitudinally and cross-sectionally, is unique. So when you're eating something like that, you just don't wolf it down. You really got to think about how amazing the animal is. And sort of once you have a sort of a respect for the animal, then you want to protect it. And I think that's, for me, that's something that I like to promote when I talk about tuna, especially the bluefin tuna, that it is something that's really worthy of our respect and also our protection.
Sashimi is just sashimi, right? Well, wrong. You never really know how many different animals can be eaten raw until you've truly explored the rabbit hole that is the sashimi realm. Just like beef, pork or lamb, there is similarly a myriad of cuts when it comes to tuna, even within the same fish. Maximising the use of all the different muscles in a tuna, aside from delivering an incredible spectrum of flavours and textures, is an imperative in maximising the total utilisation of each fish and delivering sustainability to the species. Yeah,
so there's three main parts that most people are probably familiar with. In the West, we often just refer to tuna as maguro, and it's just the red part of the fish that we normally eat. Maguro just means tuna, but the actual red piece of the tuna meat, which is the muscle really that drives the animal, is called akami, which literally means red meat. And then just like myself, as they get older, they put on weight around the midriff and around the belly. And on the midriff side, it's chutoro. A lot of people think that might mean middle fat. And then on the belly, that it's called otoro, which translates really as big fat. But toro is actually, it comes from the verb torokeru, which means to melt. So it means big melt and middle melt. And it's that fat content that gives it that feel of melting in the mouth. And that's the most valuable piece now, of course, on those sort of northern bluefin and southern bluefin tuna species. There are many, many different parts to a tuna. There's the head meat, the cheek meat. There's the different parts, but even within the belly flap itself, the sunazuru, if you like, is the part where the belly, it literally translates as rubbing on sand. So if the fish was sort of swimming too close to the sand, that's the first bit that would hit the sand. So they have this amazing sort of food culture built in and around the different parts of a tuna, fish that we eat. And they really are very different based on the season, what they're eating, where they're migrating. And the big-eyed tuna have a really deep cherry red. They come up to the full moon. You catch big-eyed tuna 1 week before and 1 week after the full moon. But because it dives down deeper, it's in colder water. It has this sort of toro as well. So there's a whole culture in and around it, and it varies up and down the coast of Japan. And different names for the fish as well, and the cuisine that they've got. It's fascinating, actually.
If I were trapped in one city and had to eat one nation's cuisine for the rest of my life, it would be Japan. So said the travelling gourmand, Anthony Bourdain. The level of detail in every aspect of culinary appreciation in Japan is without peer. No better reflection of this is in the determination of the sushi-san in his selection, handling and presentation of tuna and his never-ending quest to be the best.
Oh, I loved it. It was incredible when I first went there and got to see the culture and just the different parts of the tuna. And to give you an example, one of the things that did surprise me was seeing a fish that was a month old at Tsukiji. It had come out of the water in a cold temperature, had been looked after, killed properly, and then transported properly and then stored properly. And they call it jukusei in Japanese, and it refers to aging. And it's a process where the fish, basically the inosine monophosphate, which is the monosodium glutamate, if you like, of tuna flesh or fish flesh, and it's really highly correlated to umami. That peaks, but at the same time, these off flavors start to develop, but it gives it a much more depth of flavor profile, and it's amazing how that happens. And similar to cognac, as explained to me, where the 60-year-old cognac is fully oxidized and off, but there's only 5% left in the barrel after 60 years, but they just use drops of it and they marry it with these younger years, and it gives us some incredible flavor profile. That sort of stuff just sort of blew me away when I first went there, and I think I put that in my thesis. And I wish that in Australia that we could start to look at all the various species that we have that sort of open themselves up to that sort of maturation and putting them between kombu, the kelp, using the polysaccharides of the kelp to preserve it, but to also mature it and bring out these more complex flavor profiles and textures that you wouldn't otherwise have if you just threw it in a pan after a couple of days. Yeah, I did take the Director General of the Worldwide Fund for Nature for some northern bluefin tuna at a time where WWF was certainly very much against it. They're a very open gentleman to learning and understanding how important the fish is to the Japanese. And so it was great to take him there and show him that. But, I've had some amazing fish. I've had situations where you're eating fish that's from Orma or Toi, and if you ask the wholesalers, they'll have a different opinion on which is the best quality fish. And even some of the wholesalers, even though they're sort of married to northern bluefin tuna through it's an arranged marriage, culturally arranged marriage, because northern bluefin tuna is known as hon maguro, and it's the same hon that's in Nihon, which means Japan. But you'll have some of them say some of the southern bluefin tuna at certain times of the year from certain parts of the ocean comparable. Southern bluefin tuna, according to the Japanese, has sanmi, which is like an acidity which leans itself to be eaten with white wine, for example. I have had some amazing experiences eating some amazing fish with some amazing people, and many of them.
In order to manage and conserve a seafood resource requires a deep knowledge about the resource itself, where it breeds, when it breeds, how much it breeds, and where it travels through its life. Whilst this might seem like a simple task when discussing farmed fish, born in a hatchery and raised in a pond, for a migratory species like tuna, and in particular the far-roaming bluefin tuna, this not only requires extensive research, but multi-nation collaboration with the tuna oblivious to borders, exclusive economic zones, or marine jurisdictions. The Commission for the Conservation of Southern Bluefin Tuna is an intergovernmental organisation responsible for the management of southern bluefin tuna across the supply chain from catching, trading and management. The CCSBT's objective is to ensure, through appropriate management, the conservation and optimum utilisation of the southern bluefin tuna. The use of next-generation science and monitoring is the basis of building strong and sustainable futures for the southern bluefin tuna.
Well, being a migratory species, it really does require collaboration. Intergovernmental agreements, obviously, are what these regional fisheries management organisations are all about. So it's not just about coming together and signing a document or an agreement. It's really about following up and manning up. And the CCSBT is the only single species regional fisheries management organisation. It's the Commission for the Conservation of Southern Bluefin Tuna. It is very difficult. High seas, migratory fish, high value, and you know, first stage of reproduction for these species can be around 6, 7, 8 years before they start reproducing, and they can live to 40, 50 years. So it is a challenge. It requires these countries to come together and then make commitments and follow up on it. And they've got to come together and they've got to invest in the research to make sure that, or to help ensure that they're tracking in the right direction when it comes down to recovery, having a proper management plan in place, and really, coming to agreement on the science and then moving forward on that. I think the other thing too is the application of technology like DNA tracing is important. I did a project called Tuna CSI, sort of crime scene investigation, because when I was doing my PhD, there's a gentleman called Professor Lee Burgoyne at Flinders University. He developed a technology to trap the DNA in a card that can be analysed, computer shelf sort of stable, and can be analysed later. I was using that in its developmental stages on Skiji, getting DNA from tuna. One of the things I realised then was that the Australian researchers, through this close kin project, were looking at the DNA structures of the adult stock and the juvenile stocks. And it was a project called Close Kin. And they used parent-offspring pairing. Basically, it was like, how interrelated are the tuna populations that they're sampling? It's like if you're walking through a village, you're going to see more people that are related to one another. If you're walking through a city, you're going to see less people that are related to one another. So that gives you an indication of whether you're dealing with a city-sized population versus, say, a village-sized population. And so, with that, they also found 30 different microsatellite markers on the DNA where the individual fish were varying. And I realized that with that technology, we could track a piece of sushi, a bit of or sashimi from a restaurant all the way back to the actual individual fish that it came from. And it was like, we don't know what it codes for. Could be it's like the blue eyes, the brown hair of tuna, but we don't know. But it did vary by individual, and that was a very powerful tool, because at the end of the day, you're not going to invest in policing if you can't get a conviction. And that technology can get us a conviction. So that technology needs to be adopted by the CCSBT. Each fish needs to be numbered and randomly sampled to make sure that, the number on the fish the number on the the piece of sushi, if you like, or the fillet that the sushi came from, matches the number of the fish that it's purported to come from in terms of the fishery or the ranching industry.
Alistair Douglas is a scientist with a mission. He has a staunch belief that conservation is best driven when there is a commercial imperative to not merely support but to drive science. His business, Eachmile Technologies, understands that many of the social, financial and environmental problems we are facing as a global seafood society can be traced back to the complex and sometimes corrupt systems that have evolved to bring us our seafood. The Eachmile mission is to use technology to transform the global supply chains to be more sustainable, responsible and profitable. Interestingly, they exist as a for-profit entity, and whilst they openly claim that their focus will never be profit alone, the basis for their business is using market forces and increased transparency to drive up quality of tuna and change behaviours for good.
Yeah, so Eachmile's basically trying to develop and deploy technologies through supply chains, and obviously our expertise is mostly seafood. It's really about how do we get and achieve traceability. And we've really focused on developing nations, and basically because they really can't afford to pay for traceability systems, and nor really they should. They provide us with our fish, and then we also expect them to provide us with traceability, and everything's been a bit of an externality over the last 2, 3, 4 decades, where we've used the powerful US or Australian dollar to buy fish from, these developing nation fishers and farmers. And so Australia imports 70% of its seafood. We sit there and we talk about how sustainable and green and how you should be like us. Yet 70% of our seafood is from overseas. So we need to help them. The market needs to pay for these systems. They need to pay for the traceability data. And so we came up with a blockchain system with a token that allows that to happen, so that you can not only when you buy the fish, you can pay for the data that shows or helps show that it's come from a source that's legal, reported and regulated, that the product is authentic, and that it's safe, and adherence to any sort of sustainability or responsibility standards that it purports to be. I think it's our responsibility to provide the incentive and the technologies to these fishers and farmers that provide us with our seafood, the fishers and farmers that provide us with our seafood. So that's what we're doing at Eachmile.
At present, 89% of global wild fish stocks are overfished or being fully exploited, 50% of seafood is thrown away, and as much as 60% of the seafood we take from the ocean is discarded, lost or wasted in supply chains. Illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing accounts for more than 700 kilos of stolen seafood each and every second. The seafood industry is a major commodity market that is mostly still using outdated and inefficient processes to buy and sell product. Alistair and his team at Eachmile have been working to harness the power of digital trading and blockchain such that the flow of information moves from buyers to sellers in supply chains, rewarding those who make the extra effort to capture and communicate data. For hotels, restaurants and retailers, this delivers the accuracy and transparency they are seeking to know where, when and by who the seafood that they use comes from.
Well, I think that, obviously the pandemic has shown that a lot more people are using platforms to purchase fish, online platforms. There's certainly an increase in demand for seafood, given that it's a lot healthier than other sources of protein and micronutrient. I think it's also, when done well, it's more sustainable. What people don't realise is that aquatic animals and plants float. They don't have to invest energy into a stem, a trunk or a skeleton as much. And so they're very, very efficient at converting, energy into feed and food for us. So, there's a lot more demand for it. The hard part is obviously, with trading platforms, we often buy things that are what are considered search goods, and they're goods that are easily, you can demonstrate compliance to a particular standard. So if you're going to go buy a computer, it's got 16 gigabyte of memory, and it's processes at 2 gigahertz, whatever it is. And when it gets to you, it's going to do that. It's not going to deteriorate over time. It's not going to go from 16 gigabyte to 15 gigabyte to 14 gigabyte, because obviously fish and seafoods are perishable. And so the challenge on platforms is that how do we communicate what the quality will look like? How can we be predictive, if you like, about the quality of the product as it were, what it will look like when it gets to the customer, especially if they're overseas. So these are the sorts of challenges, but technology can help us with that. We can assess a product's freshness and sort of say, and put it down to a number of ice days, and so that you'll have 7 ice days of freshness when it gets to you in Shanghai, for example. And once people sort of trust those technologies, then the whole platform sort of disruption comes into the seafood supply chain. And that's something that, those sorts of efficiencies, I'd like to see implemented into the seafood industry. The industry in Australia it has been somewhat decimated. Elements of the industry have been decimated. Australia, essentially, 84% of its exports have left on aeroplanes in terms of value. And those aeroplanes haven't been flying. So a lot of our high-value species, the industries have really been hurt by the pandemic. 94% of our imports are frozen that comes in. So we've got a significant weakness there. So we need to start investing in value-adding technologies and approaches and consolidation of the industry a little bit, help the fishermen. We need to democratise access to quota so that the fishermen and the crew and everyone's being looked after and incentivised better, I think. The captains, the boat owners are all coming together. And then how do we sort of have these sort of cooperative value-adding structures and in place to then value add Australian seafood for Australians and also for the overseas markets, because it really does require economies of scale, a great deal of coordination. And how do we then implement best practices, total quality management, those sorts of things, and really value add our seafood and get the most out of it. As challenging as that is, I think it's something that we have to do, and it's something that really excites me. And of course, on the tuna side, that's what I'm focusing on going forward.
Dr. Alistair Douglas's mission is to combine science, conservation, IT, and his love of tuna for the benefit of all. His unique skills across the worlds of fishing, fisheries management, conservation, fish trading, and importantly, cuisine, allow him a unique perspective on how to deliver sustainable fisheries into the future. This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. A Deep in the Weeds production. I'm John Susman. Follow us on Instagram at Fishtales Seafood Podcast, or email us at fishtalespodcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay tuned for more tales from beneath the surface of the seafood world every Friday on your podcast app.